Okay, let's go. So, welcome everyone to the 10th webinar in our series on the human rights to water and sanitation. Women are central to much of our work in fulfilling these critical human rights. And so this special day, International Women's Day, is a perfect opportunity for us to bring attention to the needs of women and also the opportunity that women provide for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water. Hence our topic on women, water and human rights. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. It celebrates women's achievements, but also gives us the opportunity to challenge stereotypes, fight prejudice, expand perceptions and improve conditions. The inspiring women that we've invited to speak to you today in our panel embody all of these perspectives. All are leaders in their own right, despite circumstances that do not actively encourage the inclusion of women. Today, we want to open the opportunity to discuss why more women are not in positions of decision-making, what has been the impact of their absence and the loss to society, and what do we need to do to support the inclusion of more women in the workplace at all levels, particularly for water provision, so that we can increase their contribution to the welfare of society and to them. So we'll be dividing the webinar into two sessions, allowing a chance to question the panelists as we go along, rather than waiting until the end. So please do drop us some questions in the Q&A box. We'll also endeavour to answer chat discussions as we go along and invite each of the panelists to draw some conclusions at the end. Which leads me to introduce our fabulous panel today. Starting with the former Attorney General from Brazil, Raquel, and the Chief Director of Global Cooperation and Strategic Partnerships from the South Africa Department of Water and Sanitation, Nchedi Moripe. Both Raquel and Nchedi hold leadership positions where they are an inspiration to other women. They are, however, an exception, and it will be interesting to hear from them today a little about how they have realized their achievements and their views on the difficulties that face women that want to participate in decision-making. From her vantage point, Nchedi is also able to give a more general description of the challenges that face women in water at all levels. So each will give a short presentation, allowing us to engage with them both. Before we move to the second half, we will be able to concentrate more on case studies and statistics. So I'd like to introduce Raquel Dodge, first of all. She's notable in her election as the first female Attorney General of Brazil, at a time when the president was running a strong anti-corruption campaign, and she was charged with prosecuting politicians in the corruption-plagued nation. Raquel has a history of working with human rights through her program at Harvard University, where she was part of the team that drafted the first national plan for the eradication of slave labor in Brazil in 2003. Today, she serves in the Superior Court of Justice as Deputy Attorney General of the Republic. Please, Raquel. You're on mute. Raquel, just unmute the...
Okay. Hello to all. My cordial greetings to all. The theme, as she said, of the International Women's Day in 2021 is Choose to Challenge. I never tired to admiring the intelligent strategy of those women who preceded us in the challenging of fighting for the rights of all women. In inventing a path, they began with political rights, to vote and to be voted, because they knew we would only have other rights if we participated in electing those who make the laws, or took part directly in drafting them. A century after the conquest of political rights, we realized that this strategy was correct, because this period of 100 years proved to be the most fertile to define women's rights in the planet. In countries like Brazil, women have acquired the right to manage their own assets, have custody of their children, access to higher education, receive equal remuneration, receive protection of the integrity of their bodies, among other rights. In many countries, the same has happened. However, the inequality between men and women remains immense. Furthermore, we also see shrinking participation of civil society in organs of power. We see the reason clearly. Women do not participate in the vast majority of decision-making forums. They are minorities in parliament, in the executive and management positions in the institutions that formulate public policies and hold justice. Women remain confined to decision-making positions that do not change the situation of inequality. I chose to challenge this situation when I sought the position of Attorney General of the Republic in my country. The same year, I completed 30 years in my career. I was the first woman to hold the position and became the 41st Attorney General. I disputed elections among my peers and finished second. The list of the three top candidates was given to the President of the Republic, who chose me. A year later, I filed a criminal complaint against the President and against the person who became President, succeeding him. The following year, the last of my 2-year term, I argued to annul several public policies established by the new president. I knew it wouldn't be easy. First, because the powers of the Attorney General in Brazil are exercised before the Supreme Court, our highest court of justice. These powers are very broad and require considerable legal knowledge in all areas of law. Second, because these powers affect the acts of Parliament and the highest authorities in my country. They involve the control of public authorities, the implementation of public policies, and the guarantee of human rights. Third, because Brazil was experiencing, and it still is, conditions that weaken democracy and fundamental rights. Finally, the fact I was a woman in this position was unprecedented, leading to resistance and mistrust regarding my ability, integrity, and competence. None of these factors paralyzed me, just as it did not paralyze my predecessors who strived for the opportunity to serve our country as Attorney General. On the contrary, the opportunity to be the first woman to hold this position also encouraged me to be the first Attorney General to defend human rights as the hallmark of my mandate, including defending water as a human right and acting to protect sources of fresh water and the environment, all highly valued themes on this panel. I successfully proposed to attorneys general of all continents the creation of the Global Institute of Prosecutors for the Environment, bringing them together in Brasilia right after the 8th World Water Forum. I was elected its first president. It seems to me that the crisis of democracy need to have a new element, that of overcoming inequality between women and men before the law. To do this, it is necessary to ensure that women have a seat at the decision-making table. As Martin Luther King would say, this is an urgency of now, especially in the face of the reality of COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to a state of affairs that seems to have increased the fragility of the female condition. In the past, the strategy of equality prioritized the exercise of political rights to influence the drafting of laws that defined rights. Today, the strategy of equality needs to include women occupying decision-making spaces to influence the formulation of public policies and the realization of justice. In fact, many laws in my country discriminate against women's rights, as do many public policies. As the organizers of this webinar say, such laws and policies ignore the priorities and emphasis that women would give, or the specific needs of women and girls, and some of the most sensitive cultural aspects, which are evident to women who care for their families, the elderly, and people in need of care. I conclude by saying that many women have inspired me in their actions to defend gender equality, access, and opportunity. Many others have taught me that to change the world, we have to volunteer to perform difficult tasks. I hope I have honored the legacy I received and to have the opportunity to see many other women occupying decision-making roles so that we can build a more just society and sustainable human development in Brazil and in the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Raquel. I'd like to encourage everyone to post some questions in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we'll have a chance to ask some questions after this next presentation. So we'll just move into Nchedi's presentation now, and then we'll ask some questions. We'll have a bit of time for a Q&A, if that's okay. So thank you. I'll now introduce Nchedi Maphokga-Moripe, who is Chief Director in the Department of Water and Sanitation in South Africa. Over the years, Nchedi has championed various initiatives to promote gender and the role of women globally. She's participated in roles and activities ranging from a member of the International Advisory Committee of the UN Water Action Decade. She's a contributor in the UN SDG High-Level Political Forum. She's a permanent alternate Sherpa to the President of South Africa and the UN World Bank High-Level Panel on Water, just to name a few. So, Nchedi, please, would you like to speak next?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I really want to first say Happy Women's Day to all the women who are here today listening and participating in this great event. I would definitely start by saying the theme that we have today is really great. I think it really talks to what women should be thinking all the time. Take the challenge. Make sure that we are there for other women. Madam Moderator, I just want to say to you today, as I was listening to our television stations, I heard our president launching a new initiative again that shows how much South Africa is really very serious to support women. He launched something that they call the GBV Response Fund, which will definitely upgrade and assist women to make sure that they empower other women and assist them to be protected from all these oppressions that they have. Madam Moderator, let me greet my co-presenters, Ms. Dosh, Ms. Raquel, Mariet, Teresa, Gutierrez, and Mariet, my friend, and all the ladies and gentlemen here. The first thing that I should stress before I go to the statistics and everything, I should say to you, South Africa has been very serious in making sure that we empower women, particularly in the sectors like water, where definitely, as I will talk to the stats later, you will get to see how much work was done and how much we achieved. Our president this year declared 2021 the year of a woman who died years ago, who was a politician, who was a fighter for women, Ms. Charlotte Maxeke. The theme that goes with that in the country for this month will be promoting human rights in the age of COVID-19, which is really talking to the water issues. COVID-19 shows us that water is the first defense in the absence of the vaccine, particularly for the poor who might not be able to get the vaccine earlier. When we go further, I want to say, Madam Chair, that the role of women in South Africa is definitely important and has been very serious to an extent that women are included in decision making. To show that this has been serious, I have some statistics that I want to talk to you. Firstly, to say that our ruling party decided years ago, not even 2 years or 5 years ago, that they will go for 50-50 parity on everything that happens in the country, be it business, be it work, or be it any other leadership positions, including the leadership positions in the political parties. And how does this impact on women, particularly in the water sector now? Definitely, I can say vertically we are fine. The power that is given to the women is enough for them to be able to carry other women and to empower them and to make sure that all of us are at par. And horizontally is where I think the problem is, because this is where we must cover the ground and make sure that we bring on board a lot of women. Therefore, it is still a challenge for us as South Africa and for all other countries to ensure that we focus on the horizontal part of it, because it will not help us to have women sitting in high positions, but the women down there who should be impacted by these positions that are held by other women do not feel that. And we should be asking questions in relation to that, to say, what is the problem? Why can't we reach out to other women who need to be part of the leadership position in the water sector, or who even need to just be there to participate in the water sector and share with all of the other women that are there? And the question again becomes, who is responsible to make this happen? Because we always sit and talk about this, but no one takes responsibility for the blockages and for the slow pace that we are empowering women, and that other nations are getting women to high positions and empowered positions, including positions of decision making. So we really need to answer these questions to say who is actually not doing what they're supposed to do, because definitely in South Africa, we do have the political will. Definitely in South Africa, we do have women who qualify, and they are currently, most of them, in great positions of power. And I want to pose this to myself, but the other people will probably talk to it on the chat and when the question and answer question, as to say, what is the missing link? I really cannot find what the missing link is, because I can submit, Madam Chair, that particularly in South Africa, the women that are in leadership are supposed to be able to do this, because they are holding all the necessary power and the necessary positions to bring change. And do we have a strategy to do that? That is the question that really, for me, seemed to be a challenge. That's where the missing link comes for me, so that we can be able to do this and empower women, so that when we talk and say we do have women, other women should say we have seen it and we can feel it. In South Africa, currently the Minister of Human Settlements, Water and Sanitation is a woman, Ms. Lindiwe, Her Excellency Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu. The Deputy Minister of Human Settlement is a woman. The chairperson of our portfolio committee is a woman. If I only mention these 3 people in these great positions of power in the water sector, you will agree with me that it should not be a problem to empower other women and to make sure that the power that they have works for other women. When you go to the statistics of our boards, which are the ones holding the power, the implementing entities in our country, the boards has got a lot of women, to an extent that the total board members should be 68. And out of 68, we've got 33 women, which gives us 49%. On the total executive of the executives of the boards, they have 72. Out of the 72, they've got 32 women, which gives us 44%. For me, really, Chairperson, this is a great achievement, because you can see that women are there and women are supposed to be really use their power, and as they are empowered, to make sure that women are feeling the power. That the key deliverables that must come out of these women holding positions definitely must impact on promoting socio-economic development, reduce inequality of from other women down there, ensure that infrastructure is developed so that all women can be having access to water, clean water, and so on, and enable rural communities to participate and improve their livelihoods, and promote greater citizen participation in decision-making in this sector, and also to allow innovation and knowledge to flourish. Madam Chair, I just want to say to you that in my conclusion, I want to really leave it to all the participants to go back and answer some of the critical questions that I posed to myself and try to answer, saying, using their own experiences in their situation, in 2022, when we come back next year, are we still going to be asking the same questions? Are we still going to be saying the percentages are at 30, are at 20, or we do not even have any leadership in other countries where women can be empowered, and those that are having power can be able to change the lives of our poor people out there. Madam Chair, let me leave it at here. I am definitely sure that South Africa is on par, and that South Africa is doing very well in terms of empowering women and having them in decision-making positions. I thank you.
Oh, thank you both very much for your presentations. We've got time for a few questions before we move into the second section. And I have a couple of prepared questions that I'd like to ask, but I also would like to encourage the audience to send in questions if you have something specific that you would like to ask either of our first two speakers. So I'll start with Raquel, and it's fascinating to hear. Raquel, are you still available? I can't see.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. It's fascinating to hear how in Brazil you've managed to forge a way with some of the work that you've been doing, which has been quite outstanding. And I just wondered if you think that the work that you've been doing has encouraged other women or has enabled other women to take similar type of roles, maybe not Attorney General, but whether it's changed anything. Do you feel like it might have?
I hope so. I received a wonderful legacy for other women and men who supported them in their role in public service. And I act in order to honor that legacy. And I hope to see soon other women assuming this difficult position of Attorney General of Brazil, of President of our courts, of judges that prioritize some civil lawsuits, for example, that favored women and protect their rights. Many problems we have in Brazil in the area of human rights violation, and many of them that are related directly to women's rights violations. So it is very important that we have a clear strategy for this 21st century, in my opinion. Last century, the women decided to fight for political rights, the right to vote and the right to be voted, because this was the clear strategy of defining rights for women. Now, we need to participate on decision-making positions in order to implement their rights, to avoid retrocess, and to further the fight for the equal participation of women in society. So this is a clear strategy that we need in Brazil. I was in another meeting this morning with judges in Brazil, and we were talking about that. Women are not even 1/3 of the judges in our judicial system, and only 2 of them presided the highest court we have, and only 1 woman was Attorney General, and not even 1 woman had presided already the Bar Association. So we need more women in the judicial sector. because we probably have more empathy with the suffer of women in society in general. And maybe we are more able to bring this perspective when we are applying the law. And we need also to identify the laws that discriminate against women in Brazil. I will give you one example. The laws at the security sector. When there is a problem in a family in Brazil, women leave the job and go to take care of their parents or their children at home, because we don't have enough facilities for elders and children in Brazil. So women have to do that. But this situation cuts their right to receive government aid when they have to retire. It's difficult to implement retirement rights in Brazil. So I think it's a law that discriminates against women because it does not recognize their role in our society. We could talk about many other aspects, but I think this is enough.
Yeah, it's a very helpful answer, actually. And I think listening to the two perspectives from Brazil and South Africa, it leads us very nicely into another question that was asked just on the chat, specifically for Nchedi, that actually follows on from your answer, because this one is from Simon Duo, who asks, since the Landmark Gender, Water and Development Conference in London, November 14, and the fact that South Africa for more than 10 years has had women in the top 5 positions in South Africa's water sector, what has changed as a result of having women in those positions? So that might be a good example of, you know, in 10 years' time, what are the results of that? And Nchedi, would you like to answer that?
Thank you very much. I see that the question is specific to a specific province and so on. But what I can say is that we can respond to this answer on statistics. The fact that the women that I'm talking about are women in South Africa, currently I cannot attach this to any of the provinces. I am an official in a national department where we take statistics for national impact and national progress that we're doing. The fact that he is referring me to a specific province, this poses back to me that we need to now maybe categorize to say the rural provinces maybe do not participate enough, because maybe the urban provinces that are active in doing work are the ones that are participating. But that would mean the women who are in the statistics might be participating in his province coming from other provinces, maybe because the skills that are required for certain things that are happening that brought us to where we are not there in that province. But it's a good question, because now going back, we need to say as a department, how broad, that is why I spoke about the vertical and the horizontal layout. That response, the question need that kind of response. How much ground did we cover? Are we everywhere for women? Are we on every level from up to the bottom? Or are we only focusing on this horizontal line where ministers and deputy ministers, DGs and deputy director generals are women, but we don't have women getting the impact down there? I think in my presentation, I tried to actually get to that, to say, I think that's where the missing link is. We need to know where are the rural women who are the ones who really need to be impacted by the leadership that we have. And definitely this is a diagnosis that we need to give to the ministers who are women, to say, do you think women feel your leadership? Do you think the power that you are holding is really impacting on the people that really needs you, who voted you in, who are supporting you, who are only waiting for you to look down and get them there and tell them what to do, because they will run. We have very simple programs that are helping rural women in South Africa, but I'm definitely sure that the person who is asking the question wants to check around the issues of women in business in the water sector. Definitely every procurement that goes, we give credits for women who are part of the applications to say that they must be prioritized, provided they do have the skills that are required. And we are on it, and it's in our policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And there are so many more questions I'd like to ask at this point, but I feel that possibly we should move on to the next speakers, and then we have a chance at the end to maybe pull this together. But I think from what you're saying, it's one thing to create the desire for things to change and to put it into place through leadership, but actually making it happen on the ground is the difficult part. And I think that the speakers we have in the second half of the session might give us some ideas of some ways forward. And then maybe we could review it again towards the end. So don't go away, please, because I'd like to ask you some more. Thank you very much, both of you. And I'd like to now move to our next speaker, please. Hold on, I'm just nearly closed the box. So the session 2 is more around case studies and statistics. And our first speaker is Dr. Mekala Krishnan, who's a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute. Our research focuses on various topics related to inclusive growth and economic development, including climate risk, globalization, productivity growth in advanced economies, and women's role in labour markets. She also serves on the board of the Global Fund for Women, a leading public foundation dedicated to improving global gender equality. Thanks to one of her MGI reports that I read, where we're losing $12 trillion from the global economy because of the loss of female contributions. And it prompted my request for her to share some of the findings of this report with us today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amanda, and great to be speaking with you all on International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to all of you. So I wanted to take the next few minutes just to give you a little bit of an overview of research we've been doing at the McKinsey Global Institute on women's roles in labor markets. So this is not specific to women's role in water, but more broadly, taking a little bit of a step back to say, why are we talking about this issue of women's economic participation? Where do we stand across the world on gaps in women's participation today? And how should we think about the agenda going forward? So with that, let me just quickly share my screen. Great, Amanda, is it visible to everyone? Okay, great. So let's start with why we're talking about this issue. So we all know that investing in women and girls is the right thing to do, but we also wanted to understand, is there an economic imperative from advancing gender equality globally? And the short answer is yes. Tackling the global gender gap is worth a lot. We did an analysis that looked at 95 different countries in the world and asked the question, if men and women were to participate in the economy at more equal rates, how much would that add to global GDP? Now, I use the phrase more equal rates because we considered a scenario first of women's absolute equal participation. And we said, what if women and men participated at exactly the same rates? They worked at the same labor force participation rates. When they work with the same wages, they work at the same number of hours. And what we found was that that would add $28 trillion, that's trillion with a T, to global GDP by 2025. But then we said to ourselves, 2025 is a very near-term target. It requires us to fundamentally accelerate trends beyond the pace at which we've been doing things in the past. So let's look at a different scenario. Let's look at a scenario not of equal participation, but where every country in the world starts to bridge gender gaps. So the rate of progress is the same as best-in-class countries in that region. What would that do to global GDP? And the short answer is even that acceleration of progress would add $12 trillion to global GDP. That's essentially doubling the growth in women's output compared with a business as usual scenario. It's equivalent to adding economies the size of Japan, Germany, and the UK to the global economy. And every region we looked at stood to gain. So this matters both for countries that are grappling with issues of demographic shifts and want to find other opportunities to grow their GDP. It matters to countries that care about inclusive economic growth. Lifting 50% of their population is arguably the single biggest opportunity for inclusive growth. So there is a big economic case to be made from investing in women and girls. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. Having said that, though, progress has been very slow. So we've done an analysis that has looked at two different aspects of gender equality, what we call gender equality in society. This is things like equality in education, equality in digital and financial inclusion, as well as equality in the workplace. When we've talked about equality in the workplace, we've of course looked at things like women's labor force participation, women's participation in leadership, but we've also looked at the question of unpaid care work. So how much do men versus women spend time on things like childcare, on household work? And we know in many parts of the world, women spend a disproportionate amount of time on these activities. In many developing parts of the world, this is of course a large portion of time that women spend on things like gathering water. And so what we find is large inequalities across the world on both dimensions. So imagine this as a score of 0 to 1, where 0 is absolute inequality, 1 is full equality. And what you see is that on both dimensions of gender equality in society and work, we're very far away from 1. And what we see is that over time, progress has been very, very slow. So we've seen some change in these numbers between about 5 years ago when we did this analysis and today, but the progress on both dimensions has been very slow. And you see that when you start to look underneath some of the indicators that I described. There's a set of indicators that are the ones on the left where we've actually seen some movement over time. Things like women's participation in leadership positions has increased by a small amount. Things like women's participation in political representation has increased by a small amount. But there's many, many other indicators where we've essentially remained flat. Things like unpaid care work, things like digital inclusion, things like financial inclusion. So there is still a long way to go to bridge gender gaps. And this is true both when we look at advanced economies as well as when we look at developing economies. The other thing I wanted to mention, just given the nature of this presentation or this conversation, is the link between gender equality in society and gender equality in work. Oftentimes we treat these two as quite siloed issues. We talk about women's participation in the world of work as distinct from thinking about things like equality in education or equality in the eyes of the law. But what we found was that these two aspects of gender equality are actually very closely linked. So what you see on this chart is that same measure of gender equality in society and gender equality in work that I described previously. Each dot on this chart is a country. And you see a relationship between the two. Essentially, if you have high equality in society, you also tend to have high equality in the workplace, which suggests that the two go hand in hand. And we've seen this also when we look at the micro evidence on what it takes to advance gender equality. Interventions to address one often are provide a virtuous cycle with interventions to address the other. So what this means as we think about driving progress on this issue is it's important to think about this as a holistic issue. Important to address a range of policy interventions that both address equality in society as well as equality in the workplace. We cannot look at these issues in silos. So that was the picture before the pandemic, and then the pandemic has hit, and what we've seen is that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected women in many ways. Of course, from a health impact standpoint, there is evidence that suggests that men may be more susceptible to the virus than women. But when we think about other aspects of this pandemic experience, there are many, many reasons that women have been more affected. When we think about the health response, we know that many frontline workers in many countries are women and so are disproportionately at risk of exposure. We know this when we look at the labor market and what has happened to women's participation in the economy. We did some analysis in July of last year that looked at job losses from the pandemic, and this was July, so fairly early on into the lockdowns. And what we found was that women accounted for about 39% of the global workforce pre-COVID, but at that point had accounted for 54% of job losses. Results since then of labor market surveys in everywhere from the US to India has suggested that women have borne even more of a disproportionate brunt of some of the job losses that we've experienced over the last year. And then finally, there's the double shift that women are experiencing in the lockdown situations that we're seeing across the world, where already pre-pandemic women were doing more of the care work and shouldering more of the care responsibilities in a household. With the pandemic, that has only increased. While both men and women have increased the amount of time they're spending on care work, women have disproportionately increased that time. And we're seeing this manifest in a variety of ways. They're withdrawing from the workforce, they're reducing the hours that they work, but it's also posing immense burdens on mental health, creating situations of burnout and anxiety that women disproportionately are experiencing. And so what does this mean for where we go going forward? What our research would suggest is that we are at a crossroads. I think there is the opportunity now in this moment of reinvention, as everyone is talking about the next normal, to take action today to advance gender equality on a variety of fronts. If we take action today, we could end up in this better world of work, in this better state of gender equality in society, capture a lot of that $12 trillion opportunity that I was describing. However, if we don't take action today, we actually stand to lose substantial ground. All the hard-fought gains over the last year could essentially be wiped out in the next few years if we don't pay concerted attention to this issue. So what are the set of actions that we need to take? There are many, but I wanted to highlight a few for the purposes of this conversation. The first is, as we think about women in leadership positions, particularly as entrepreneurs, we know that small businesses have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And so it's important, as we think about a stimulus response, as we think about recovery, that women and women-owned businesses are a core part of that equation. The second is using this moment of reinvention to commit to rebuilding the care, to building, I should say, the care economy as, and thinking about the care economy as a crucial part of economic infrastructure. And that is everything from the childcare economy specifically, or childcare infrastructure specifically, but also when it comes to other basic services that women disproportionately are fulfilling, things like access to water, things like sanitation services that disproportionately burden women. The third is thinking about narrowing and eliminating gender gaps when it comes to digital and financial inclusion. We know what the pandemic has done is only accelerate many of the trends to do with technology adoption in the future of work. And so if we don't make these concerted efforts to allow women to participate in this new world of work, in this new future of work, they could stand to further lose ground. And then finally, for companies, rethinking how they think about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. For many companies, what the pandemic has done is it's reinvented how they work. We've adopted things like flexible work, virtual work in the corporate workplace, which has been great. It has allowed people to balance the increased needs of their home lives with their work lives, but it's also placed additional burdens, as I described, on women. And so it's important to think about how these new practices that we've adopted maybe actually, what of them we want to have stick post the pandemic, and what of them we want to reinvent so that people can better manage home life and work life, and not and be able to take advantage of some of these trends that we've put in place. So that's a very, very high level agenda. We can dive more into this in the Q&A, but with that, let me hand back to Amanda to take us ahead.
Thank you very much, Mekala. Well, I think you've answered some of the outcomes of the webinar already in your last slide. That's very interesting. Let's move on and hear from the other two speakers, and then we can dive into some questions. So please continue to send in questions. So our next speaker today is Teresa Gutierrez, who's a technical specialist on employment-intensive investments at the Employment Policy Department of the ILO in Geneva. And she's a gender specialist on public works. She's worked substantively on the promotion of employment creation and employability of disadvantaged groups, with a primary focus on women and indigenous populations, putting emphasis on local knowledge, local resource, and human rights approaches. Her field experience in Latin America countries include job creation through infrastructure services, including water and sanitation. Please, Teresa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Women's Day for all of us here. And I am really happy to be part of this panel. And many thanks to Amanda and Rights for Work for this invitation. My participation is going to be based on how we can include women in paid jobs through infrastructure development. The next, please. Okay, I have these numbers for you. My predecessor had a very interesting presentation on statistics, and I picked 4 main indicators to see how we can, which is the real situation of women. So here we have a vision from women's rights to work and at work. One of them is the right to equal access to paid work. However, the reality is only 26%. We have a gap of 26% between women's and men's labor force participation. The second one is more critical. We promote decent work with social protection. However, 75% is the proportion of women's employment that is informal. So 70% of the working population is in the informal market, and therefore they are unprotected, especially in developing regions. The other one is fair and adequate earnings. However, as I said before, there is a gender gap approximately of 24%. But also I want to put emphasis that when we promote decent payment, decent wage, we are talking about payment for a work of equal value. And the last one, which is interesting and is related to this presentation, is when we talk about equal sharing of unpaid care work. Here is 2.5 is the time that women spend on unpaid care and the domestic work than men. And here we are going to see the critical importance of infrastructure. The next, please. So we are talking about the care-related infrastructure, and I am bringing here the importance of universality of this kind of key infrastructure, especially water and sanitation and electricity. And if we can see in this table, really the percentage, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, to get access to these services is quite high. But also at global level, the lack of improved sanitation facilities still is high. How we are going to contribute creating decent jobs in the infrastructure sector, but at the same time trying to promote this access to this key care-related infrastructure. The next please. The program where I work with is the Employment Intensive Investment Program. We have 3 dimensions to promote women's participation. We mainly work in rural areas, promoting job creation through infrastructure development, but especially with public investments. So the gender dimensions that we work with are those, as I said before, to promote direct wage employment and to have an appropriate gender balance in participation. So we have to try to address any constraints on the supplying of women's labor. The second one is to address those factors of design and implementation that facilitate or constrain the participation of women. We have to make sure that the infrastructure created, the assets created, really respond to specific needs of women and men, but that also they are going to benefit of that infrastructure. Sometimes we think only in big infrastructure, but in the end, it does not benefit directly to women or specific groups, especially those disadvantaged groups. So, and the next, please, the next slide. Okay, So how we do this process? Of course, this is a program that has more than 40 years in the ILO. And it's one of the programs that is really based in the field, and we are in close relationship with local people, but we have to create an enable environment at policy level, so governments have to make sure that their investments are going to benefit those in need. With at meso level, creating a corpus of contractors, but also building capacities in the technical structures of the local governments or the governments themselves, and at the micro level by creating opportunities for the people that are there. And we try to go especially through this, from the policy level to the project level. As you can see here, we have some pictures to show that consultation is key in this process, so we can have women representation in the project. Planning, capacity building in not only, they have to know their rights. This is a session on violence, gender violence. We have to raise awareness as well. But also we promote women's participation in key positions like engineering. But I must say that we are really far from closing this gap. It's very difficult to have women in women engineering in this kind of positions. Then once we have decided the project and we try to build up all this capacity, we have a specific, the next slide, a specific process of capacity building for the person, because we have to take the advantage of this short-term project that they get paid off to build up their skills for employability. So in this process, we try to build up capacities, for instance, in masonry, if these are projects on water and sanitation or water-related projects, in plumbery, in masonry, we try to bring hydrological engineers, but also on managerial skills, digital skills to close the gap so they can have this process. And this kind of training is on the job, but also getting this kind of theoretical capacity building. And for doing this, we have key guidelines to develop this. The next, please. Here I have one example from Tunisia where, as you know, there is a very important issue that we have to take into account. Since construction is a male-dominated area and women have to be in the open space, we have to think also in cultural norms that it is not the fact to put women to work as numbers. We have to provide quality of work, but at the same time we have to respond to those specific cultural norms or policy framework of the country. So in the case of Tunisia, for instance, this program works with women in the design process, especially. So women can identify which are those specific infrastructure needs to improve their livelihoods. And we include also, the lady here in the picture, she's an hydrologist who helps to design the infrastructure. But then the outcome of this project, this specific project, was to create irrigation systems to increase the lands of some specific fruit trees to create a market for agribusiness. So in this case, infrastructure is an entrance point for another kind of livelihoods and of course, economic diversification. The next, please. The productive social and safety net in Tanzania, it is a program in Tanzania. Also, it is one project that we are doing for water on the right-hand side, but the other one is also a training program with local contractors, so these contractors can hire local people, but at the same time, they can respect some basic indications that are established in the contract. No? Like, for instance, the quota of at least 40% of women. There is one important issue that we promote is the flexible working hours. So we can facilitate women's participation. And we have one standard and that it is a task-based system. So people, they don't work as established 8 hours. They have a task system that they can develop within a given time. It usually is 1 week, so they can organize by themselves and they have to perform to complete that time. Also light work during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and childcare arrangements in some locations. These are general recommendations that we have for different projects and all the projects. But also we are promoting the work with the community to see how communities can also, with the local government, can create opportunities to work for not all elder women, but for those women that can take care of children to facilitate women's participation. I would like to leave you with one video that came today from Jordan, from one project we have in Jordan, where can show you more of these kind of examples that we do in our programs. In different parts. In the case of Jordan, it's very important because Jordan and Lebanon are 2 countries that we are creating the same percentage of your opportunities for host communities, but also for refugees. So I can leave it here and then we can continue later on.
Mariet, yeah, the video I think will be too difficult to run on the Zoom. Oh, thank you very much for your examples of.
I put the link in the.
Lovely. Okay, I see it in the chat. That's great. Let's move on to our last speaker and then have some time for questions. So I'd like to introduce Mariet Verhoef-Cohen as our last speaker. She's president of the Women for Water Partnership and immediate former president of Stereotypes International, and also on the board of Human Rights to Water. Mariet is an expert in the education, empowerment and enablement of women and girls, in ensuring that they have the capacity, experience and vocational training needed to manage water resources and gain careers in water-related professions. Her goal is to position women as active leaders, experts, partners and agents of change to realise access to safe water for all and for all uses. Mariet, would you like to speak, and then we'll open the floor. Thank you.
So, sorry, I was still muted. So thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here on this special Women's Day. And today I think we can safely say that there is a deep connection between women and water, and that women are, we've heard it during this webinar again, disproportionately affected by water and climate with a devastating impact. And the role of women as key water users on domestic level has been recognized, as women are largely responsible for fetching and using water for household purposes. So women have water knowledge. Women are water experts. But are they invited at the decision-making table, at the designing table? Do they get the jobs? Next slide, please. In 1992, 30 years ago, the Dublin Principles were agreed, and I keep repeating principle number 3. Was the first time it said, women play a critical role in the supply, management, and safeguarding of water. And this means from the designing table to the decision-making table, women have to be involved. The next slide, please. The gender gap in water-related employment needs to be closed if the world is to reach its commitments on water and sanitation for all. So now is the time for change. We know that service providers face immense challenges. Billions of people still lack access to safely managed drinking water and sanitation. And rising urbanization will worsen this crisis. Unavailability of these basic services, including water and sanitation, denies human rights. I think Nchedi has said that as well. The next slide, please. Only 17% of the workforce in the water sector is female, and this includes administrative jobs. Women face immense barriers to join, stay, and grow in this sector that is so dominated by men. The barriers can be gender norms, lack of role models, harassment, lack of women-friendly environment, and this is only mentioning a few. And don't forget, we heard this earlier, up to 75% of global unpaid work is done by women. The next slide, please. However, the water services sector is changing. Utilities are more customer-oriented. New technologies are used, and the sector is making progress towards gender diversity in comparison to 20 years ago. These shifts, together with an aging workforce, inadequate skill sets, and other challenges, make issues of human resource management even more important. And that's why water and sanitation services must apply all available talent and remove barriers to female employment. This will benefit women, but it also benefits the utilities themselves, and it will have an enormous economic impact. The next slide, please. The most powerful women within the top jobs in the water industry, 5 years after the Global Water Intelligence first compiled their power list, they found out in 2020 that 5 years later, that still only 2 women are in that top 20. So reports from, we've heard it today, but also from IWA, the World Bank, well, we heard the ILO, we heard McKinsey, they show that the significant challenges for entering the water sector and the missing enabling environment to stay in that sector. But they also show the critical role women play in designing and executing successful water, climate, and systematic change solutions. Slide number 7. It is globally accepted that 75% of the unpaid work is done by women. To solve this major challenge, we need financial investment in women. Women organizations, women projects remain largely underfunded and underrepresented in key leadership roles and negotiations. Research into diversity in the private sector, including the water and food processing sector, shows that companies with the highest percentage of women in management were, on average, 47% more profitable than those with the lowest. Furthermore, already in 2011, the FAO calculated that if women will have the same access to productive resources as men, yields would increase by 20 to 30%. Nutrition would improve, and hunger, which is SDG 1, would be reduced by up to 17%. The next slide, and my last one. So in summary, I can say it is both sensible and effective to ensure that women participate at all levels of decision-making in the water sector. The integration of women in the water industry can contribute to gender mainstreaming throughout the sector and to services being managed from the perspective of women. This goes hand in hand with the allocation of sufficient means for empowerment, capacity building, vocational training, career enhancement to enable women to fulfill these roles. So finances should reach women directly, because that is the most effective and efficient way to secure success and to get women into the sector. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mariet. That was a really nice rounding up of the different issues today. And we've got some time for questions now. So actually, looking at the questions I had prepared, a lot of them have been answered, but I'm actually thinking that the one that as one of the questions I suggested may be suitable for any of the panelists to answer, but I originally wanted to direct it to Mekala to ask her, what, in your opinion, is the single most important change that organizations need to make to encourage participation of women, in your opinion?
That's a great question, and obviously a huge one. So if I had to pick one, and when I think organizations, I'm mostly speaking to companies, but I think the same thing applies for other institutions as well, is not treating gender as a separate issue, but integrating it into all decision making. So if I'm a company, for instance, as I think about hiring, as I think about promotions, as I think about retention, as I think about employee satisfaction, as I think about compensation, as I think about the future of work and reskilling, all of these need to have a gender lens to them. And the reason for this integration, or the imperative for this integration, is twofold. One is it allows gender to not become a siloed issue and not therefore fall in the priority list of companies. So it is core to how they think about decision making and strategic progress. And this is also true for organizations more broadly. The second is the fact that this is, as I said, a multi-pronged issue, right? There are aspects to do with gender equality in society, aspects to do with gender equality in work, and the two go hand in hand. So it's important that we take a holistic view of this issue and a holistic view as we look to manage this issue. And therefore integrating it into every decision, asking ourselves with every decision, what is the impact on women? How can I use this decision to advance women? Will be, I think, the biggest catalyst for progress. Now, of course, there are also specific things that companies need to do, which we can get into in further questions. But to me, the integration needs to be a core part of driving the agenda forward.
Thank you for that. Do either Teresa or Mariet want to answer that question, or would you prefer me to ask? The other question I had really for you, Maria Teresa, actually was, how do you think that the work that you've done to encourage more women into the workplace, the practical examples, how do you think that can be scaled up? Because clearly you've invested development funding into actually developing a system. How do you think that can be scaled up so that more women can take advantage of that?
Well, we had to work at different levels. The experience, especially in those projects that are related to maintenance of roads or maintenance of the water systems, teach us that women, especially when we talk about the maintenance of water systems, because they are close to the domestic activities, they have to be empowered, but also trained to do the maintenance of the systems. So we have to start bringing girls at a school to have this new thinking that they have to engage in this kind of new technical skills related to infrastructure or to the value chain of the construction. Not only for water issues, but also, for instance, in all the value chain of civil engineering, for instance, how they can build up those capacities. And it also helps to change the mentality or the stereotypes that are around the the case of infrastructure especially. That's one point. So we can work at a school or higher. Also, we have to create with the public, with the private sector, a space for internships for these girls that are studying engineering. How we can bring also we bring some girls studying engineering to our projects to do some internship, so they can really work in the implementation of the projects. And then you create a corpus of technicians that can take over policy or decisions in the sector itself, because they can engage in as public servants, but at the same time they can bring the voice. But also there is a third point that we have to be aware, is that we have to promote the dialogue between, also with with male counterparts, to make them more sensitive, to open the possibilities. And of course, we have to have some targets or some discriminatory measures to bring women in some stages. But for instance, a very interesting market for women is also contracting, to develop the contractors market. So in this case, countries can also have a more sustainable infrastructure, care work, for instance. It is more sensitive, and we can promote really something substantive in the future.
Thank you. I like your point about changing stereotypes, and I think that's the root of some of the challenges that we have here. Mariet, would you like to perhaps comment on that in terms of how maybe we can, what you think needs to happen most in terms of changing those stereotypes?
I think the stereotypes will change eventually. It's still there, and we just read in one of our national newspapers that if women go into politics, they are harassed and get really a lot of bad mouthing sort of tweets, and that is not going to change, and it's apparently. But anyway, I mean, going back to the water world, I think the stereotyping will come in time. I think what we do is, and I think Nchedi said the same thing, nothing about them without them, because we really have to go to the grassroots and ask what they need. Make sure that they can voice their needs, that they can voice what they actually need. And that is the link between what the women on the ground do and what the governments do. That link is missing. I think in that respect, Women for Water is an organization that can make that link. Also, all the reports, I mean, how do those reports and how do the suggestions and the solutions, how do they go to the grassroots? I think we have to involve everyone, all the women on the ground who have no water, who have no telephones, who have no ability to travel and to voice their needs. I think if we are able to get their information to the top, maybe we can progress a little bit faster.
Oh, thanks. And that maybe gives us a good segue back to Raquel on the governance side. Raquel, would you like to comment on this in terms of what do you think we need to do to make the most difference here? Listening to some of the comments here today, what do you think is the most important thing we need to do to change stereotypes and help make women more participative?
I think one approach could be, we have to develop new projects and present a new way to solve problems in participating on the decision-making positions. And I would like to mention as an example, one thing that happened during my mandate as Attorney General. We had been experienced lack of fresh water in Brazil. Brazil is known by its abundance of fresh water, big rivers, like oceans, as big as oceans. But we have experienced the lack of water in our big cities. And why it is happening? Because the freshwater sources have been destroyed by the pavement of roads, by constructions, by new houses, by developing agriculture and cattle industry too. So if we are facing this problem, how it is happening in other countries where freshwater sources are less abundant than in Brazil. So I embraced a big project inside our country called Water for the Future Project, developed by one of the branches of our public ministry. And I spread this project throughout Brazil. And I brought this project to the UN's, 2 sections of the UN in Kenya. And I also talked to the Attorney General of Kenya about it. And he said, we are facing a lack of fresh water here in Kenya too. And I invited him to come to Brazil and learn from this experience and talk to our specialists and we have a school for prosecutors in Brazil to talk to the teachers to see what's happening, the technology of that we are using, using imagery from satellites to detect where there was water 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and there's a lack of water now. So using public images paid for by our government, we were able to detect and to build a database of freshwater sources in our country. So sharing this kind of experience, embracing this kind of projects, we are also embracing women's rights, because as Mariet said, women are the main protectors of water. The lack of water is the cause of internal migration in Brazil, for example, and also the lack of access to fresh water in the big cities. So I think this kind of project shows that we women, when we are assuming decision-making positions in big institutions like inside the judicial system, we can provide innovation. Not only innovation in the arguments on how we use the law, how we enforce the law in favor of women's rights, but what kind of attention it's needed now in order to prevent women's rights violations. So I think Water for the Future project is an example on how to use women way to look to the reality and have empathy to the problems in our society in general can make a difference. And I hope this project, for example, flourishes inside Brazil and in many other countries, because it had showed a potential to change reality.
Thank you, Raquel. Nchedi, what are your thoughts after listening to the presentations today? Do you have, if you wanted to change one thing to try and encourage more women into the workplace, particularly on water, what do you think we need to do? Women at grassroots level, we're talking about now, aren't we?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, Madam Moderator, listening to all the speakers and seeing the questions that we get on the chat, you realize that actually the problems that we have are global. There's no problem that is specifically South Africa or that is specifically any other country, Brazil or so. But the biggest issue, which is, I'm happy that all of us cannot get our hands on it, the link between these powerful women and these women on the ground. I think that's where we need to all try to work on, to try and create some kind of, I don't know if that person those people should be go-betweeners. There should be people who report that we are unable to knock the correct doors. Here are the women, they are ready, they want to come in, they cannot be allowed to, they don't know where to start, they are not empowered to do what they want to do, or they cannot get even funding to do that. So the whole thing is, I think we are fine up there with positions in most countries. We are fine with how the progress in terms of women asserting themselves, because as women, we cannot always be taken by hand, be put there, because once you are put there without qualifications, without the assertion that you need, without the knowledge and everything that is required there, you might fail yourself. So women should equip themselves, assert themselves, show that they do qualify. We don't want to be given these things for free. We want to be there and be allowed to show the power that we have and be empowered. Desigan said something on the chat that Malibongwe Gamala Makosikas. That means hail the women, power to the women. This is what we say in South Africa, and we are pushing that. The whole thing is that once we are there in the power, we might have to find a strategy to bring on board all those women who are not coming with qualifications, who are not coming with experience, but wanting to participate at the power and the level where they can. I think that's what we need, so that everyone can have a little piece in this big stake that is there globally. Those women can do something small that can impact the environment, that can bring back the life into our water systems and our rivers and all of that. Just because we are allowing them, let's allow them to come in. Let's create programs for them that suits them while we are using the power that we have up there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Nchedi. I'd like to invite everyone to have one last chance to make a final comment. Mekala, do you want to, very brief, please suggest one more thing? Have you got any more comments? Or you could answer one of the questions that we haven't managed to answer in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the final comment I will just have is just going back to the slide that I showed on equality in society and equality in work. I think what I love about this conversation is we're recognizing the multifaceted nature of gender equality issues, right? And that is, I think, unfortunately, the reality of this challenge, that it is not just one issue, it is 20 different issues rolled into one that are all connected. But I think that is also an enormous opportunity to foster new ways of collaborating, new ways of working together, multi-stakeholder partnerships, things that happen at the grassroots level, things that happen at the global level. I think the nature of this problem means that we need to address it across silos, and we need to address it at many different levels. And I'm heartened by this conversation because it's speaking to that need for collaboration and that need for innovation, because I think that is what we are going to have to bring to bear.
Thank you. Mariet, Teresa, very quickly, last thoughts. Do you have some comments to make on this?
Yes, I think I've said it all. It is, I do agree, collaboration. I think women have to work together as well and appreciate each other. I mean, we're not always doing that. And I think if we sort of collaborate and give the opportunity to all women at all levels, I think we'll get more done than we're getting at the moment. But on the other hand, I think this is the time to change. This is, and we have to take that opportunity. After COVID, we can start with the new normal, and I think women should be part of that new normal on an equal basis. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mariet,
yes. In my case, I think that this process, COVID has taught us the importance and the burden that women's carrying on care services and specifically on all these issues. But at the same time, it is a good opportunity to learn and how we are really building up more consciousness about the role of women, but at the same time, how we are transferring to the new generations the right to give them a voice, but at the same time to take decisions and to change their options for building capacities, to choose their new careers or building new businesses, to be more strong in their economy and to develop their agency of to decide what to do. I think we are in a good in a good process.
Thank you, thank you. Raquel, last word from you.
I would say, let's choose to challenge ourselves, learn to collaborate more with each other, to support more, to be more supportive, to appreciate each other's idea like we did today in this wonderful presentation. And if we choose to challenge ourselves, I think we will be able to choose to challenge the world. I learned a lot from you. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. To choose the challenge. And Nchedi, you're our last one to have a last comment.
Also would like to say, definitely we choose to challenge, and definitely we must know that this water issue is not a favor for women at all levels. It is a human right. It is a right for all women to participate in the water sector, and they just need support. I think next year, I hope we will have organizations that will probably take it out there and try to check the contribution of women during the COVID pandemic. You will find that women did so much unpaid for, that you know, we needed to have our houses clean. We needed to have everything. Hygiene was part of the process of COVID pandemic. Even today, women conquered. Why? You can check with for yourself, how did the women who are getting water from the rivers manage in this time of COVID? How do those that get water from the tankers manage in this time? They made it easy for governments. They made it easy when they were told what to do and did that, and most of them for nothing. They cared for the sick. They did everything. Let us check the role of women in everything. This time the pandemic showed the power of women, and let's choose to really support them. Thank you.
Nice. That's a very nice ending to today, to talk about the power of women and the need to support each other and collaboration. I've been writing those words over and over again here, with collaboration and innovation and changing the stereotypes. And I really want to thank you all so much for a really interesting presentation and discussion. And of course, we've only scratched the surface, but it was a great opportunity to bring some of these issues to the table. And thank you very much for your time. And I hope that this is just the first of many conversations. It's lovely to meet you all and talk with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.